I thank the honourable member for his statement. The next speaker is the Honourable Nigel Darmlal. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'd like to join with the others before me in commending you on the achievements that you have garnered over the past few months, and to also express the honor of coming back after the recess, having to speak on an important issue and an important segment of our country, youth. Mr. Speaker, I have a fundamental problem with the National Youth Policy as it's presented before us. And I say this for an important comparison, that having read the National Youth Policy, having studied the National Youth Policy, and having myself been one of the creatures of the former government promoting youth development, promoting youth leadership in Guyana, I wish to state, Mr. Speaker, that the approach that this document has harnessed speaks more to the problems affecting youth versus youth as a resource. And I think that this is a fundamental reason why, if implemented as is, and whilst I say implemented as is, we have no clear indication from what is presented before us what the government intends to achieve out of the policy, how it will be implemented. So when the PPP was in government, and even up till now, we always advocated for youth as a resource of this country. However, what we have is a government who itemizes and stigmatizes young people and youth in Guyana. In 1992, when Dr. Jagan and the PPP took office, a ministry dedicated to youth was configured. Last year, 2015, when this government, the current regime, took office, a ministry dedicated to the resource called youth was dismantled. So there is a fundamental difference with what our vision for youth is and what the government's vision for youth is. And why do I say that there is a fundamental difference? We started off by treating with youth as a priority. The programs that we implemented, the policies, and Mr. Speaker, unfortunately, I think some members of the other side of the House, honorable members, I must say, this is a piece of paper. This is not a policy. What obtains in here is what a policy is. So reading this, holding this, and claiming that this is an historic document makes no sense. I'm sorry if I sound disrespectful, Mr. Speaker. But we cannot continue to treat with youth with this arrogant rhetoric, with the condescending attitude of speaking down to them, by alienating them from opportunities in this country, from alienating them from leadership. And Commander Irfan earlier spoke about the composition of the parliament and about the composition of the government. So if there is a real commitment by this government to work with youth, then why, Mr. Speaker, the government only consulted with 0.6% of the young people of this country in putting this document together? 0.6% of the young people of Guyana have been consulted to put this document together. 0.6%. That is the type, and the document says it. 68% of the country, 68.8% of this country's population is between 14 to 35 years of age, the young people of this country. The document also says, Mr. Speaker, that there was consultation. There were 52 organizations consulted. And then there was a questionnaire circulated. Mr. Speaker, an important segment of our country, almost 510,000 people, almost 510,000 people. And if we were to include the pre-adolescents, it'll go beyond 600,000 people in this country. And only 52 organizations, and we have no idea how they were invited, how they were consulted, and a survey of 3,000 people. And this is what we've come up with. But, Mr. Speaker, I don't expect any different. Because, as I said from the start, the PPP's mandate on youth is that we treat youth as a resource of this country and not as a problem of Guyana. So my general comments, Mr. Speaker, and I wish to simplify them as much as possible. One, it is my belief that this document does not zero in on the needs of our young people. And specific, and I'll get into my specific comments soon to their demographic, to their identity, and to their cultural and historical backgrounds. This document is too general to impact on young people, on 510,000 people in this country. This document also purports to be a policy. It is very onerous, it is ambiguous in its description of youth and young people. It focuses on youth more as a problem, as I said, rather than as a resource. The policy that I see before me, Mr. Speaker, and that I've read page by page, and I can comment page by page if you permit me, it is geared to quick fix, throwing sand on a blaze. The young people's future in this country cannot just be a whitewash. It cannot be a checkbox because it was promised in the APNU's manifesto. May I remind too that when Dr. Jagan took office, it was under his administration that the National Youth Commission was established. And it came out of not a physical document, but it came out of the vision that we had for young people. It also resulted in the creation of the PYARG, in the YEST, in the NOC, and in the Youth Community Interaction and Participation Program. These still continue until this day, Mr. Speaker. The other thing is, the Honorable Jorman Figueroa mentioned the advisor to the Ministry of Education and Department of Culture, Youth and Sport on Youth is Mr. Aubrey Norton. Mr. Speaker, since I was growing up as a boy, I know Mr. Norton has been a senior man. And he is the advisor to this government on young people. Mr. Speaker, there is also something else I want to tell you. You know, I was involved a lot working with Amerindian people and in Amerindian villages. I got a message last night from an Amerindian young person, and they said they're not receiving their stipend under the HEYS program. You recall when we were in government, the HEYS now replaced the YEAP, the Youth Entrepreneurship and Apprenticeship Program, when 1,972 young Amerindians were immediately terminated upon assumption to office of this regime. That young person, in their message to me, Mr. Speaker, said they went to the Ministry of Indigenous Peoples Affairs to speak to the coordinator of the HEYS. When I did my research, the coordinator of the HEYS, the Hinterland, is it Education or Entrepreneurship Youth Scheme, is 54 years old, Mr. Speaker. 54 years old. And you tell me we cannot find any young Amerindian in this country to be coordinator of the HEYS. A 54-year-old man is the coordinator. It is ridiculous with what is taking place. Anyway, Mr. Speaker, I continue. 5, I do not think that this policy, as I said earlier, Its focus is on the problems, but it does not reflect